Don't underestimate this old man. He is a master of escape.
3 razy nawiałem bolszewikom. To i szkopom damy radę.
In his opinion, Polish prisons can't hold him. Nazi concentration camps are even a piece of cake. But the next second,
Podejdziemy.
clearly, he mistook the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp for a worldly haven. As the foremost of the Nazis' 5 major concentration camps, Auschwitz imprisoned a total of 1.3 million prisoners during its 5-year existence. Shockingly, as many as 1 million people were killed here, making it a true hell on earth. In Auschwitz, there was no humanity, no order, only endless slaughter and intense labor. For the prisoners, escaping alive from this place was more difficult than reaching the heavens. Until one day, a peculiar inmate arrived at the camp. Unlike the terrified expressions of the other prisoners, his gaze was remarkably determined. That's because he was Tadeusz Peter Żukowski, the former Polish lightweight boxing champion known as Teddy. On his first day in the camp, a young boy recognized Tadeusz Peter Żukowski's identity. During their labor, the boy expressed his admiration for him. However, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski advised the boy to take a good look at their surroundings. In this place, everyone was a slave. There were no boxing champions. On that day, while assisting a German officer with his move, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski seized the opportunity to steal a few apples. Back in the barracks, he shared one apple with the young boy, as he noticed the boy's lunch had been taken away, leaving him hungry all day. To his surprise, after taking a bite of the apple, the boy gave it to an even weaker elderly man nearby. Tadeusz Peter Żukowski had no choice but to take out another apple. However, this time, the German officer behind him noticed. All of them were taken to the execution site. The officer ordered the old man to place the apple on top of his own head. Obliging, the old man did as he was told, but he didn't anticipate that the officer's aim was not for the apple but for his own head. Next, it was Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy's turn. Faced with the officer's command, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy didn't comply. Instead, he picked up the apple and took a bite. In his mind, since death was inevitable either way, he might as well have a last taste before dying. Enraged, as the officer aimed his gun ready to shoot, the young boy standing beside them suddenly recited a German poem. It was a poem praising heroes, and upon hearing it, the officer's mood brightened. He immediately changed their death sentence to 25 lashes, allowing them to experience the power of German poetry. Though the whip lashed and tore at their bodies agonizingly, at least their lives were spared. In stark contrast, the Jewish prisoners weren't as fortunate. Faced with this group of non-laboring women and children, the German soldiers didn't want to waste bullets. They deceived these people, claiming they were going to take a shower, but instead led them into gas chambers. The cries of agony echoed throughout the camp that night. To more conveniently manage the prisoners, the Germans selected some obedient inmates as overseers. The prisoners believed that having their own people as overseers would make things a little easier. But they didn't anticipate that these fellow inmates, once given power, would become another terrifying presence within the camp. One overseer broke a sausage in half and threw it on the ground, making their fellow prisoners scramble for it like dogs. Not satisfied with that, he called 2 others and used the remaining sausage as a reward, urging them to fight each other. However, both of them hadn't eaten for several days. Before the fight could even begin, one of them collapsed. The overseer wasn't pleased with this outcome and resorted to cheating. In the second round, he replaced the opponent with Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy, who had a similar build. But he didn't know that Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy was the former Polish lightweight boxing champion. Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy refused to strike his fellow prisoner, and the prisoner's punches couldn't land on him either. The overseer was dissatisfied with this kind of fight and decided to teach this disrespectful man a lesson personally. However, he ended up being thrown to the ground with a dodge. Another overseer felt insulted and grabbed a shovel, preparing to discipline Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy. But at that moment, a higher-ranking overseer called him to a stop. It turned out that he recognized Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy's skill and wanted to have a match with him. After a polite fist bump, this overseer couldn't have imagined that his punches would never land on Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy. Despite his small stature, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy was remarkably agile. While continuously evading, he quickly found an opportunity to counterattack the overseer. The overseer was delighted. He had finally found an opponent who could fight. Upon learning that Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy was the former Polish lightweight boxing champion, the overseer held him in high regard. That night, he gave Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy a large piece of bread and 2 sausages. However, for the numerous prisoners, these provisions were merely a drop in the bucket. The next day, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy sought out the overseer again. He wanted to obtain more food. so the overseer introduced him to a German officer. After learning about Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy's credentials, he granted him permission to participate in boxing matches within the concentration camp, for the amusement of the officers. In the first match, his opponent was a German soldier with powerful punches. Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy was initially pushed back, but he quickly adapted to his opponent's rhythm. In the second round, he began a fierce counterattack. Soon, the German soldier lost the ability to resist. The spectacular performance pleased the officers, and as a result, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy won a significant amount of food and an easy job taking care of horses. The easy job provided him with great convenience for recovering his strength, while other prisoners toiled outside. He secretly trained in the stable to improve his punching. He even stole and drank goat's milk. After a while, he became stronger and defeated one German soldier after another. His reputation grew louder and louder. One overseer sensed the danger and kindly warned him that if he wanted to live here, he should tone down his behavior. However, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy seemed oblivious to this advice. He continued his intense training, channeling all his dissatisfaction with the German military onto the boxing ring. At this point, he hadn't noticed the expressions of the German officers in the audience, which had lost their smiles. Not long after, a special prisoner arrived at the concentration camp. He had a fierce expression and a muscular physique. He was specifically brought in by the officer to deal with Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy. It was an unfair match, as the two fighters were clearly not in the same weight class. As Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy was chased and dodged by the muscular man, the officers became extremely excited. They thought it would be a brutal massacre. However, they failed to realize that the muscular man had no knowledge of boxing. Despite his size, he lacked technique and couldn't land a hit on the agile Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy. After circling around and exhausting the muscular man, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy saw his opportunity and landed a punch. He won again, and all the prisoners present cheered for him. When he returned to the dormitory with his food, he received a hero's treatment. Everyone hailed Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy as a beacon of hope. However, the next day, as the cart carrying corpses passed by the stable, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy was shocked to see the muscular man he defeated yesterday, now executed. He suddenly realized that this might not have been just a competition. In the eyes of the officers, they were merely tools for amusement. He didn't want to witness anyone else dying because of this sport. That night, he approached a boy and expressed his unwillingness to participate in the fights anymore. But the boy told him that he was not just fighting for himself anymore. There were too many children in the concentration camp who needed food. If he gave up, the fate of these children would be a one-way ticket to death. He needed to fight, to keep fighting. However, the officers clearly didn't want to give him any more chances to win. That day, they brought in a current boxing champion, Krop, all the way from Germany. This guy had heavy punches that could kill a prisoner with just one hit. Fighting him would undoubtedly be a brutal battle. Soon after, the match between the two began formally. From their physical appearance, it was evident that they were not in the same weight class. Krop was strong and skilled in boxing techniques, while the slender Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy couldn't even stand up after taking a single punch from him. But when he saw the contemptuous gaze of the officers, a sudden surge of strength emerged within him. In the second round, he began to change his tactics. Instead of attacking, he used his agile body to constantly dodge. When Krop showed signs of fatigue, he launched a fierce counterattack. After a series of maneuvers, the situation on the field unexpectedly turned around. The German officers, seeing this, quickly called over a prisoner. After murmuring a few words, the prisoner picked up a jug of water and brought it to Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy's lips. After he finished drinking, the next round began. However, at this moment, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy suddenly experienced dizziness and blurred vision. Krop took advantage of this and quickly knocked him down with a punch. Unbeknownst to him, the despicable officer had poisoned the water. Officers don't want to see their country's champion lose at the hands of a prisoner. Despite the officer's deceitful tactics, he was determined to continue the match. But the officer brought in another opponent for him, the boy. He was beaten to the point of being covered in injuries, and his hands were bound with barbed wire. The officer ordered them to fight each other, threatening to shoot them if they refused. Everyone knew that the boy and Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy had the closest relationship, but today, the Germans wanted them to kill each other. The prisoners, witnessing this scene, spontaneously took off their hats and mourned for them. It was evident that only one of them would walk out alive today. Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy asked the boy to throw punches at him, but the boy didn't listen. He smiled and turned away, sacrificing his own life to save Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy. That night, Tadeusz Peter Żukowski Teddy was stripped of his clothes, hung shirtless in the square, with the champion's medal hanging from his chest. The German soldiers used this method to humiliate the hero in the hearts of the prisoners. The next day, he was thrown into a mass grave. surrounded by the bodies of his compatriots. Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy felt his heart turn to ashes. He found an empty space and quietly lay down, prepared to accept everything in peace. But in the depths of his consciousness, he saw a charred angel. It was a toy carefully carved by the boy before his death. Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy suddenly realized that there was something unfinished. He picked up the angel and stood up again, amidst the incredulous gazes of the crowd, and once again entered the boxing ring. On the stage, Krop was mercilessly beating the prisoners. At this moment, Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy walked unsteadily towards him. He slowly climbed onto the ring, despite being covered in bruises and wounds, but his gaze remained firm. The officer on the stage signaled that he should not be allowed to live any longer. Krop understood. He took off his gloves and the showdown between the champions began. Due to being bound overnight, Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy couldn't raise his hands anymore. Instead, he used his body to constantly maneuver and engage with Krop. After successfully evading a few times, a scornful smile appeared on his face, as if mocking the incompetence and shamelessness of the Nazis. Krop became furious. In order to prevent Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy from running around, he intensified his punches. Soon, he landed a hit on Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy. After several rounds of attacks, Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy was beaten to the point of collapsing on the ground. But he still didn't give up. He lifted his body with his head, stood up once again, and the smile remained on his face. Krop grew even angrier. He couldn't understand where this madman found the courage to rise again. He began throwing powerful punches, while Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy continued to dodge and smile. Seeing that Krop couldn't land a single hit on him, Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy stopped evading altogether and presented his head, inviting Krop to strike. This blatant mockery was a direct insult to the German boxing champion. Krop landed a punch on Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy's face, causing blood to flow. But he still showed a defiant expression and continued to use his head to meet his opponent's fists. In the second and third rounds, Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy was hit so hard that he couldn't even open his eyes. Yet he continued to smile and taunt his opponent. The spectators in the audience were shocked by this scene. They couldn't understand why Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy was doing this. Just as Krop was preparing to deliver a final blow, Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy unleashed his ultimate move. He quickly lowered his head and used his skull to break Krop's wrist. Then, with a right hook and a left swing, he unexpectedly knocked out Krop with a punch. The crowd went wild. This was a movie based on a true story. Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy was the real-life Polish boxing champion. Due to this thrilling boxing match, Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy caught the attention of a high-ranking Nazi officer in the audience. He brought Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy to his concentration camp, and thus, he became one of the fortunate few to survive and walk out of Auschwitz-Birkenau. It wasn't until the end of World War II that Tadeusz Peter Żuławski Teddy was rescued by the Allied forces and returned to his hometown, Warsaw. There, he opened a boxing gym specifically for children. He always used his own experiences to teach every child in the gym. A person always needs to have some special skills so that even in the harsh environment of a concentration camp, there is a possibility of survival and ultimately escaping from adversity. I am a film enthusiast. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. See you in the next episode.